Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy. Yo, welcome back to the podcast. In part 2 of this two-part episode on how to transition away from tracking your calories, I want to tackle my suggestions if you want to take a long-term break from tracking. So for the foreseeable future, you do not want to track your calories and macros anymore. In part 1, I discussed my suggestions if you want to take a short-term break from tracking. And much of what I discussed in that episode still applies to this particular scenario where you want to take a longer term break. But there are a few extra considerations that I want to make. First of all, if you're planning on taking a long-term break, how do you do it? Do you stop tracking all at once tomorrow, or do you phase tracking out? Now, in a short-term scenario, especially where social or festive meals are involved, I just stop tracking all at once for two main reasons. Reason number one, it's a short-lived phase where you're not going to track, so you want to make the most of it and learn as much as possible about your body, your hunger and fullness cues, and how to live without tracking. So practice the hell out of it. Don't waste any time phasing out the tracking aspect. The second reason is that I'm not sure it'd be very helpful to see how many calories you've already eaten on a day when you're planning a social meal. Meaning that when I say phasing tracking out, I'm going to suggest doing so in a number of ways, such as tracking only a few meals out of the day and not tracking a few others. Now, if you do that when you're planning a social or festive meal, even with all of the best intentions, seeing the numbers may make you worry about the social meal itself. You may start thinking to yourself, oh gods, I've already eaten X amount of calories and now I'm going to eat this social meal too. How much, in quotation marks, damage am I going to make? And then these thoughts can spiral into leaving you with feelings of guilt, shame, and anxiety, even before the meal takes place. So I'd simply avoid tracking to prevent the numbers from going to your head. Now, importantly, this doesn't mean you're just going to eat everything in sight and as much of it as you want. You'll still be mindful and apply all of the suggestions that I gave in the previous episode. But in addition to that, by not tracking, you're also being mindful of not letting the numbers dictate your mood. On the other hand, in a long-term scenario where you want to stop tracking for good, the situation is quite different. And this is what I would consider. How anxious are you about tracking less often or about not tracking at all? Because if you're not all that worried, then stop tracking altogether once you've made your decision. And I want to bring up one of my clients called Pretty. Shout out to Pretty. I know you listen to the podcast sometimes. So Pretty has been working with me since late 2020. We've been working consistently together since April 2021, but we had at least a month of working together on just nutrition in late 2020 as well. Anyway, we've been working together for a really long time, and we've had phases where she's tracked and phases where she's not tracked, but the majority of the time she has been tracking her food. So Pretty, a few weeks ago, went to see her partner. Pretty is based in the UK, her partner is based in a different country. And it's a very transformative time in their lives. And for the entire month of December, they were going to have a really, really busy life. So we had a consultation, Pretty and I, we had a call, sorry, not a consultation. We had a call about it to discuss our options. And we decided that it simply didn't seem realistic to continue tracking her food. But when it came to taking calorie tracking away, I asked Pretty how she felt about it. And she basically said, look, we've been tracking for so long now that I am really confident about what I need to eat to hit the current calorie target. So I'm really not worried about it. And by the way, this is really impressive because when we first started working together, Pretty was really reluctant to stop tracking because she was seeing really good results with it. And she thought that she wouldn't be as disciplined and as on top of her nutrition without tracking. So that mental transformation is what I live for, and it's the reason why coaching is so fulfilling to me and why I believe it can really change people's lives. Anyway, that's beside the point. But with Pretty, it was really, really effective to simply stop tracking altogether. Now, another scenario would be that you're quite worried about taking calorie tracking away, in which case you can phase it out. And this is how you can do it. You can stop tracking one meal per day and keep doing that until you're comfortable with it. Then you move to not tracking 2 meals. And then you progress to not tracking for a full day. And again, you stick with not tracking that one day or that number of meals for as long as it takes for you to no longer feel anxious about it. Then you move on to 2 days until by the end of this process, however long it may take for you, you're no longer tracking at all. And this is what I've been doing with my client Riss. Shout out to Riss. He started working with me because he really wanted to improve upon his relationship with food. And he realized that he was using tracking as a crutch because without it, he was afraid of either not eating at all or overeating massively and gaining unwanted body fat. So in his case, I didn't just say, hey, let's stop tracking, because he wouldn't have been able to do that. It would have been too anxiety inducing for him. Instead, after a period of several months where we actually continued to track his calories, but we worked on his mindset around it and we worked on other aspects of his nutritional habits that we wanted to improve upon first. And throughout this process, Riz gained a lot of confidence and trust in his own body. So eventually, we decided to stop tracking for a day. And now we've progressed through that, and we're currently not tracking for 3 days out of every single week, which is really, really impressive. So, wherever you are on this spectrum between Pretty and Riz, choose the strategy that best applies to you. Now, my second suggestion is that, well, it's more of a form of reassurance, really, in that in the previous episode, I suggested sticking to your staple foods, right? But that was for a short-term break from tracking. If you're no longer tracking for a long time, you do not need to stick to the exact same staple foods forever. I always encourage my clients to have a diverse diet, and I personally cycle through different foods to promote that diversity in my own dietary pattern. But how do you know how to introduce a food when you don't know its calorie content because you've never had it before? Gasp! So my suggestion is to swap like for like, and I want to give you 3 distinct examples to help you really understand what I mean. So example number 1, let's say that you've been having oatmeal for breakfast for ages and you're tired of it. Now consider its nutritional value. Oatmeal, oats, are primarily a source of carbohydrates with trace protein and fats, and they also contain a reasonable amount of fiber. Now, what else fits that similar mold that you would consider a breakfast food or a food that you would want to eat in place of oatmeal? Some examples that come to mind are wholemeal bread, quinoa, buckwheat flakes, and whole grain cereal. Example number 2. Let's say that you're absolutely sick and tired of chicken breast. Again, consider its nutritional value. It's primarily comprised of protein with very, very minimal fat. I would not consider it a fat source at all. It's going to have what? 1% fat? Like, let's not kid ourselves and think that that's enough fat in a meal or in a day. Anyway, if we want to swap like for like, instead of the chicken breast, you could have low fat beef. So that's a beef that's around 3% fat or less. Turkey breast, isolate protein powder, which is the purest form of protein powder, so it's going to have a very, very low amount of fat or carbs. And also Quorn chicken fillet, so basically the leanest form of Quorn available on the market. Now, example number 3 is salmon. Salmon is a protein source, but it also contains dietary fat because it's packed full of essential omega-3 fatty acids. So in this case, some suitable swaps would be whole eggs, so both white and yolk. It could be another fatty fish, like sardines or mackerel. It could be canned tuna in oil, because the tuna itself would be lean, but since it's preserved in oil, you're going to get the dietary fat as well. Or it could be tofu, tempeh, or another soy-based product that retains the fat in soy. For example, soy isolate protein powder wouldn't work because it's isolate. So it's the isolated protein only, therefore it's very, very low in dietary fat. Now, we've discussed the nutritional content, but you also want to consider the portion size. For similar food swaps, for example, if you're swapping salmon for mackerel, stick to the same portion size. And I discussed in the previous episode how you can estimate your portion sizes. Now, if you're exchanging very different foods, like for example, you're swapping oatmeal for bread, consider a similar enough portion size based on the actual visual portion size, but also the nutritional content. For instance, if you're swapping salmon for whole eggs, then a typical salmon fillet, at least in the UK, is going to be around 200 calories and contain between 20 and 25 grams of protein. So to equate that with eggs, you're probably going to need around 3 medium eggs, which are going to yield around 21 grams of protein and 180 calories. So they're going to be roughly nutritionally equivalent. And also, if you put 3 hard-boiled eggs next to a typical salmon fillet, they're also roughly the same size visually. And that's where the flexibility aspect comes in. So, hearkening back to the start of part 1, I said that you don't necessarily need to stop tracking forever, and you can go back to it as a tool to help you do what you can't do right now, right? So let's say, for example, that it's been a few months and you've been changing quite a few things in your diet since when you were last tracking your calories. So now you're not sure about how things are going in terms of your calorie and macronutrient intake. In this situation, you can go back to tracking for a week or so to find out where the chips fall when you let them fall as they may. So if you're swapping foods that are very, very different and you're not quite sure about the portion size, then why not track for a week and see what's going on? And then you can make some changes to your current routine, your food routine, if there are areas for improvement, like if you realize that a portion size is too small or too big, or if you want to change some food choices to increase your protein or whatever it may be, then you can do so. And once you've established this new, very different routine to the last time you were tracking, you go back to not tracking anymore, and that's it, and you carry on. And every time you need to dip back into tracking, you can do so for a limited amount of time. Now, my final suggestion is that you can change your meal structure. So similar to what I said before for the food choices, while in the previous episode, part 1, I suggested not changing your meal structure, If you're planning on not tracking for a long time, you can decide to change it. For instance, you can decide to go from 4 meals to 3 or to 5. In a short-term scenario, especially if you have several social or festive meals, I wouldn't especially advise it. If you don't have a lot of experience without tracking, or even if you do, simply because maintaining the same meal structure is going to help with your hunger and fullness levels, as I said in part 1. But over the long term, it's a different ballgame. And before delving into the specifics of how to go about changing your meal structure without tracking, I think this is a great time to mention that you can also have a different meal structure depending on your nutritional phase. Once again, you don't have to do the same thing all the time because different methods can work in different circumstances. And in fact, you may get worse results by doing the same thing all of the time or trying to than if you tried to change your approach. For instance, it's quite common to struggle to eat enough calories in a surplus because you're not all that hungry for the extra food. Well, I wouldn't say quite common. For instance, in a calorie surplus, you may find it easier to eat more meals than when you're at calorie maintenance or in a deficit, because you have a larger calorie budget and it makes it easier, if you have more frequent meals, to digest the extra food. On the other hand, in a deficit, having fewer meals means that each meal is a little bit bigger, which could be better for your adherence. For example, I really like bigger meals in a deficit because my calorie budget when I'm trying to lose body fat, being a smaller human, isn't all that big. So I tend to prefer not having any more than 3 or 4 meals in a deficit. Anyway, if you are going to change your meal structure to one that you're familiar with, for example, you're switching from a deficit to a surplus, and you want to switch from a deficit-friendly meal structure to a surplus-friendly one, then you simply adopt the habits that you normally adopt whenever you implement that familiar structure, meaning you have the same number of eating occasions, you maintain the same timing for each of them, you maintain similar food choices and similar portion sizes. On the other hand, if you are going to change the meal structure to a new one that you're totally unfamiliar with, then I'd suggest, much like I did when I suggested changing your food choices, I'd suggest going back to tracking your calories and macros for a period of time to help you adjust your diet with this new meal structure so that you can ensure that you're getting all of the macro and micronutrients that you need. And then you transition away from tracking again. And that's a wrap for this guide to transitioning away from tracking. Thank you so much for watching. As always, if you want to connect with me or if you want to start working with me in the new year, you'll find all of the relevant links in the description below. Finally, I wish you a great end of the year, however you wish to celebrate, if you do, and I will see you in 2024. Thank you so much for listening, and until the next episode. Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.